In a packed courtroom, a white police officer lashes out, kicking a black man she assumes is just another criminal. But seconds later, the room falls silent as his true identity is revealed. He's not the defendant. He's a federal investigator, sent undercover to expose racial injustice from within. As jaws drop and secrets unravel, the officer's past comes back to haunt her, and what happens next leaves the entire courtroom stunned. One reckless kick was meant to control the moment, but it unleashed a truth that could destroy everything. She didn't hesitate. In the middle of a courtroom packed with attorneys, press, and spectators, Officer Karen Blake raised her leg and struck the black man standing near the bench. No warning, no threat, just raw force. The gavel hadn't even dropped before the room erupted in gasps. Cameras clicked, papers fell, and for a moment, no one moved. But what came next wasn't an arrest. It was a revelation, because the man she attacked wasn't who she thought. As whispers rippled through the courtroom and officials scrambled to react, someone leaned in and whispered his name to the judge. Karen's face turned ghost white. Her confidence cracked. Her hands, once clenched with power, began to shake. She hadn't just assaulted a stranger. She had struck someone with more authority than she ever imagined. Tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe respect must go both ways, hit that subscribe button now. Because what happened? Next, flipped the courtroom upside down and exposed a truth that couldn't stay buried. Darius Cole stood silently near the defendant's table, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. At 38, the former Marine carried himself with a quiet discipline that made him easy to overlook, exactly how he wanted it. Dressed in plain black jeans and a fitted charcoal t-shirt, he looked like a bystander, maybe even a late witness waiting to be called. No one in the courtroom knew he was actually a federal investigator, sent undercover on a covert corruption probe targeting systemic abuse in local courts. He had volunteered for the assignment himself, offering to be framed for a petty crime, shoplifting, just to get inside and see what the badge couldn't hide. This courtroom, small and lined with worn wood paneling, felt like it hadn't changed in decades. The judge was elderly, the gallery nearly all white, and the energy in the room was laced with quiet discomfort. The charge was minor, but the atmosphere was thick with something deeper, something that couldn't be written into legal briefs. Officer Karen Blake paced confidently across the floor, eyes sharp, jaw set. At 34, she was known for her quick decisions and aggressive instincts. She wore her uniform like armor and her badge like a weapon. Though praised for her high arrest numbers, whispers around the department often circled her name, especially when it came to how she handled black suspects. She didn't hesitate, didn't second-guess, and didn't always follow protocol. She believed she was restoring order in a world slipping out of control, but more often than not, she blurred the line between authority and aggression. She scanned Darius up and down, already slotting him into the mental box she reserved for men she thought needed to be put in place. Darius didn't flinch under her gaze. He wasn't surprised. That's why he was here. He'd seen the reports, heard the stories about this courtroom, this department, this officer, but hearing wasn't enough. He needed to see it for himself. His calm wasn't silence. It was observation. Every movement, every word, every sideways glance, it was all data. And when the moment came, he would speak. Not with volume, but with truth. And that truth would do what uniforms, ranks, and titles had failed to do. Expose what power does in the hands of the wrong people. The moment Darius was called to the stand, the tension in the courtroom thickened like smoke. He rose without hesitation, his posture calm and composed, every step measured. But before he could take more than a few strides, Officer Karen Blake moved in. Her boots struck the floor hard, her hand already resting on the baton at her side. "Back up!" she barked, her voice cutting through the murmurs in the room. Without waiting for a response, she lifted her leg and kicked, hard, striking Darius square in the chest. The force jolted him, but he didn't fall. He didn't even raise a hand. He just stood there, absorbing the blow as stunned silence swept through the courtroom. A collective gasp echoed. Papers dropped. Eyebrows lifted. And then came the chaos. The judge slammed his gavel, voice raised but wavering. "Order! Order in the court!" Karen stood her ground, jaw clenched. "He moved toward me aggressively," she said loudly. "I felt threatened." Her words hung in the air like smoke, from a gun that hadn't been fired. On one side of the room, a few spectators nodded, even clapped softly in approval. But on the other side, particularly among the black observers, there was no applause, just disbelief. A woman in the third row covered her mouth. A man leaned forward, shaking his head slowly. Darius remained still, silent, his hands by his sides, his breathing steady. He didn't react, not with anger, not with fear. He simply stood there, eyes locked on Karen like he was looking past her badge, her uniform, her excuses. The courtroom didn't know who he was, not yet. To most, he still looked like a defendant, a threat, an interruption. But beneath the surface, the power dynamic was shifting. Karen thought she had control. She thought her badge gave her the right to strike without consequence. But the real authority in that room was standing silently in front of her, unshaken, and watching. The bailiff moved quickly, approaching Darius with handcuffs ready. "Step back now," he ordered. But before the cuffs could touch his wrists, a voice rose from the back of the room, steady, composed, and commanding. "Let him speak," the voice said. Heads turned. The speaker stepped into view, holding a federal ID badge. It was the special prosecutor sent in from Washington, eyes sharp and posture firm. "That man," he said, pointing to Darius, "has every right to be heard, and before this courtroom makes its next mistake, you all need to know exactly who he is." The courtroom froze as the special prosecutor stepped forward, his voice clear and deliberate. "What just happened here," he said, gesturing toward Darius, "is not just a moment of misconduct. It's the conclusion of a federal investigation." He turned to the judge, then back to the gallery. "That man," he continued, "is not a suspect. He is Special Federal Investigator Darius Cole, assigned directly by the Department of Justice to uncover systemic abuse and racial profiling within this courtroom." A stunned silence swept the room. Karen Blake's face drained of color. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Around her, attorneys shifted uncomfortably. The judge leaned forward, eyes wide. Murmurs surged through the spectators, some in disbelief, others in sudden, dawning understanding. Darius remained composed. He didn't gloat, didn't smile. He simply stepped forward, now fully seen for who he truly was. "I was embedded here after multiple reports surfaced about discriminatory practices tied to courtroom enforcement, particularly surrounding one name," he said, glancing briefly toward Karen. "Your courtroom was selected because the pattern, was persistent. My role was to observe, experience, and record. His tone was steady, without a trace of malice. What happened today wasn't unexpected. It was exactly what we came to confirm. Karen, flustered and defensive, stepped forward. "I didn't know," she said sharply. "How was I supposed to know who he really was?" Her voice cracked, eyes darting across the room, seeking validation. Darius turned to her, meeting her gaze without flinching. "You weren't supposed to know," he said calmly. "You were supposed to be better." His words sliced through the courtroom sharper than any accusation. Better than your assumptions. Better than your fear. Better than using your badge as a shield for bias. The judge cleared his throat, but before he could speak, Darius raised a respectful hand. "Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to submit visual evidence gathered over the past month, both from courtroom surveillance and police body cam footage tied to Officer Blake." The judge, still stunned, nodded slowly. "Proceed." The lights dimmed slightly as a screen was wheeled in. The first clip showed Karen shoving a teenage boy in cuffs, accusing him of resisting when he hadn't moved. Another showed her stopping a young black woman outside the courtroom and searching her without cause. A third, perhaps the most damning, showed her mocking a public defender behind his back after a minority client spoke up in court. One by one, the videos played, each one unraveling the image she had built for herself. Her confident posture collapsed with each passing second. She stopped denying. She stopped moving. And when the final video, a slowed-down replay of her kicking Darius, flashed on screen, the courtroom saw it clearly. Aggression, not protection. Darius stood beside the screen, silent but unshaken. The truth wasn't in his words, it was in the footage, and now the whole room had seen it. As the final clips played on the courtroom screen, the mood shifted from shock to disgust. The footage didn't lie. There was Officer Karen Blake, again and again, using her badge like a weapon, shoving a black teenager no older than 16 into a wall for non-compliance, though he had clearly obeyed her every instruction. Another video showed her body cam capturing her muttering under her breath. "They're all the same," after a routine escort. In one file, she exaggerated a suspect's resistance in her report, despite the footage clearly showing him standing still with his hands up. These weren't isolated mistakes. They were patterns. Patterns of racial bias, of unchecked power, of abuse wrapped in a uniform. The air in the courtroom grew heavier with each clip. By the time the screen went black, the room felt suffocated by truth. Spectators who had once looked at Karen with admiration now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A man in the front row who had clapped during her earlier outburst lowered his gaze. A woman behind him crossed her arms, her jaw tight. Reporters in the back row began scribbling furiously into their notebooks, the headlines already writing themselves. The judge stared at Karen with a hardened expression, the gavel resting in his hand but unmoving, as if he was holding judgment itself at the edge of falling. Karen's face had changed completely. Her usual sharp stare was now replaced by a trembling uncertainty. Her eyes welled up as she stepped forward. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she said shakily. "I was just doing my job." But her words rang hollow in the silence that followed. The courtroom didn't buy it. Neither did the judge. And Darius, still standing tall, still composed, didn't flinch. He turned slowly to face the crowd, his voice calm and steady. "This was never about revenge, he said, his tone carrying the weight of restraint, of purpose. It was about truth, about accountability, about a system that lets prejudice hide behind policy. He paused, letting the words settle into every ear. Justice doesn't wear a uniform, it wears humanity. His eyes scanned the room, not with anger, but with hope that maybe, just maybe, some of them had truly seen what they had been ignoring for far too long. The silence that followed Darius's final words felt heavier than any verdict. The judge, still gripping the gavel, looked over at Officer Karen Blake with a mixture of disbelief and quiet fury. "Officer Blake," he said firmly, "you are hereby suspended from duty effective immediately, pending a full federal investigation." A stunned hush swept over the room. Then, with deliberate care, the bailiff approached her. She didn't resist, didn't argue. Her hands were trembling as he reached for her badge. The metallic sound of it being unclipped echoed through the courtroom. She had walked into this room with authority and control. She now stood stripped of both, and this time, no badge could shield her from the consequences. As she was led away, Darius turned his gaze toward the back row, where a young black teenager sat frozen in his seat, wide-eyed. Their eyes met, and Darius gave a slight nod, walking over with quiet purpose. He crouched beside the bench, voice low and personal. "What she saw in me," he said gently, "is what the world sometimes sees in you. A threat, a problem, someone to control." He paused, letting the words land with care. "But that doesn't define you. You define you. Never forget that." The teen nodded slowly, the moment settling into something deeper than just reassurance. It was permission to see himself differently. The judge cleared his throat and looked over the courtroom. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice softer now, "on behalf of this court, thank you. Not just for your service, but for your courage." And this time, the applause that followed wasn't routine. It wasn't polite. It was genuine. Claps that carried respect, understanding, and a quiet admission that something had changed. Darius stood tall, not in triumph, but in resolve. "This doesn't end here," he said. "Starting next month, a community oversight program will be established in this county, one that involves civilians, advocates, and real transparency. No more closed doors. No more silent abuse. We're turning this courtroom into a symbol of accountability." He looked around the room one final time, not as an undercover agent, but as a man determined to rebuild what had been broken. And in that moment, the space where injustice had once echoed now began to feel like something new. Truth, finally heard. She thought she was kicking down a suspect, just another face she didn't bother to see clearly. But in that one reckless moment, Officer Karen Blake didn't just strike an innocent man. She kicked down her own career and shattered the illusion of control she thought her badge guaranteed. What she never expected was that her actions would awaken an entire town, a courtroom, a community, that had looked away for far too long. And in the silence that followed, truth finally had a voice. Have you ever witnessed bias in places meant to protect and serve? Have you ever watched someone be treated unfairly simply because of how they look? What would you have done if you were in Darius's place, knowing the system needed exposing, even if it meant stepping into danger? If this story moved you, if you believe justice should be blind to race but never blind to truth, like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, eye-opening stories that reveal what others try to keep hidden.